Hello everyone. In today's lecture, we are going to see the transplant donor recipient immunological assessment the correct way. So I come from India, southern India. As you can see in this picture, the city by name Coimbatore is where I hail from, and you can see it's almost at the tip of the southern tip of the country. I come from KG Hospital, and I've been working in Evercare, Bangladesh, Dhaka for the last 2 years now. In today's discussion, we are going to see the various domains of transplant immunology, and the scheme of discussion will be under these headings: the brief procedure, interpretation of the test, advantages, disadvantages, the sources of error, problems we face in Bangladesh, and what are the solutions. The first is the CDC Cross Match, the very essence of transplant immunological testing. As we know that here the recipient serum is mixed with the donor cells, and along with the donor cells we add the anti-human globulin derived from the sheep and complements derived from the rabbit. So these are incubated, and in whenever there is a allo antibody, there is an antibody complement binding causing cell death. This cell death is identified by addition of a dye, and this dye changes the way the dead cells and the living cell appear. So these are counted, and based on the count, we give a report has 0%, 5%, 10%, 20%, or more positive cross matches. So CDC and flow cross matches, which the flow cross match will be seeing subsequently, are essentially similar. The basic difference is in the CDC we add complement and anti-human hemoglobin, whereas in the flow cross match the complements are not added, and in the place of complement these anti-human globulins are tagged with a fluorescent dye. Okay, so in principle they are the same, but the differences are complements are missing in the flow cross match. And this is how a readout, CDC readout will be. The red dots indicates here the dead cell, and the green ones are the cells which are alive, and they are semi-quantified as 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50, and so on. And this is an example where CDC reported. You can see here, these are the various elements which are done. One is an auto cross match for both, which is done with the recipient cell and the recipient serum. So here in this report is clearly reported, and IgM antibodies has been reported as negative based on the DDT. So here the T cell cross match is done along with DDT treatment, along with anti-human globulin augmentation at both 4 degrees and 37 degrees. This to see sometimes you have cold agglutination, warm agglutination, which are not immunogenic. These are all mostly IgM mediated. And again the B cell cross match is again done with at the same temperatures. Okay, and the final result, you can read it out here as CDC T cell cross match with DDT treatment and Hg augmentation is negative up till 1:64 dilution. So they're not only done as in neat, but also they're done with serial dilution as up to 1:64, and this is done for both B and T cells. So here the elements are the auto cross match has to be done, DDT treatment has to be done, of course augmentation with immunoglobulin has to be done at 4 and 37 degrees centigrade, and the T cell and B cell has to be separated. In some centers don't separate T and B cell, they just give a total cross match, and again, that's not acceptable, and then dilution is also done. So, so many of us must be wondering, so is still CDC relevant? We have advanced technologies now, is still relevant? Of course it is, because as you can see here, in situations in which physical cross match is still much more informative or complementary informative than other tests are, in situations where the allele specific antibodies or antibodies specific for particular DQ A1 DQ B1 combination. So I'll come show you the next slide what is this, what I'm trying to mean in this. But basically what it means is you still can have antibody against the DQ, and which may not be picked up by other relevant tests which is exposed more in CDC. And we can also, this test can also let you suspect whether there is a false positive SAB reactivity due to denatured antigen. It does happen sometimes. So this test is an insurance against that particular false positive test. And again, antibody to epitope shared up against multiple beads. Sometimes what happens is when you do a SAB based test or a solid phase based test, these beads they share the antibody against multiple antigens. So what happens is the MFA value of individual antigens comes down. So it is like distributing the antibodies across the different antigens. So it appears that the antibodies are not there. So this is an important test, and it cannot be bypassed even at this stage. This is basically a protection from a false positive test. And so we can see in the right hand side corner the alpha chain and the beta chain of the class 2 molecule. So these are well represented in a live in a CDC cross match, whereas the antibody it picks up the antibodies. The CDC picks up test picks up the antibody against the DQ A1 and B1 combination. So this is an essential test. The advantages of CDC, other advantage of CDC cross match is, so it helps you to suspect a false positive SAB, as I told you before. So you have to suspect a false positive SAB if the SAB for multiple alleles are more than 0.5 to 1 lakh. But however, the CDC and flow cross match are negative. So this combination is generally not possible, because when the antibodies are so high, the CDC and the flow cross match, at least one of them have to be positive. So whenever you find a mismatch, then you should suspect that one of these tests are wrong. Okay, especially when CDC and flow both are negative, there's very high probability the SAB is wrong. And this shared epitope across multiple beads. So you can see here, if you have antibody against either A1, A3, A11, A29, 30, 31, 36, 80, so so the antibody against one of them can have cross reactive with any of the other or all the other antigens. So in such instances, what happens is the solid phase assays, the antibodies are distributed, and the individual MFA value of individual bead can be reduced than the cutoffs. So we know, like in some labs they have a cutoff of 500 MFI, some have a different cutoff. So the MFI of combined may be like 2000, but then for an individual bead can be less than 500 and can be read it, and the report can be read out as negative. So CDC helps us to protect against such an instance. The disadvantage of CDC cross match is it's low sensitive, and it's actually the lower compared to flow cross match and SAB. So what are the different sources of error? One is we need to keep auto control, negative and positive controls, and if it is not clearly done, sometimes when there's a technical error, you don't actually find it out. Unfortunately, some labs don't report all, so you really don't know where they did it, whether the control was working well or not. And dilution is a must, also is essential, because if once you do a dilution, two things can be advantageous. One is we can uncover a prozone phenomenon. Sometimes there are very high antibody titers, so you know that because of prozone phenomenon, it can be falsely negative. And second is it also gives a semi-quantitative method of knowing how much is an antibody. If the antibody continues to exist up till 64, it means that antibody titers are very high. So it's a way of knowing the antibody titers. And DDT and heat treatment, or the heat treatment should be done, because sometimes the IgM and anti-HLA antibodies can interfere with the assay and give a positive result. We know IgM are not useful that much for transplant, and you will be unnecessarily denying patients getting a matched donor. And so what is the problem we face in Bangladesh? So for this, based on my experience, so here DDT treatment is not clearly reported in all the labs. So as I mentioned the previous slide, DDT treatment is important, and dilution is not given. So again, sometimes you can have very high antibodies, prozone phenomenon, and it can come with false negative testing, and percentage for positivity also needs to be reported, so we know roughly what is the situation. So blindly writing positive negative is not enough. And again, we should be careful about false positivity. I think this is a problem across the globe. So what happens is sometimes when you have like 15%, 20% positivity, they tend to give it as positive when actually the test is negative. So percentage positivity helps you, and false positive is a technique problem. So and especially I'll tell you in which instances how to detect the false positivity in the later slides. So what are the solutions for this problem? So one is DDT treatment is easy to employ, and in case DDT is not available for any reason, they can use a simple heat treatment. So the protocol is simple, and the lab people will be able to help you with. And dilution is mandatory, um, and it is a simple process. So it's again a one-step process where they have to make dilution of the serum and appropriately do the same test in a different well. And percentage positivity gives an idea as to how bad is the situation. So sometimes when you have like 20%, 25%, 30%, and you have a PRA negative, flow negative, then this test can be falsely positive. So percentage positivity can help you. And false positivity uh, can come. So how do you detect false positives? Imagine you do PRA class 1, class 2, CDC, and also flow cross match all together at the same time. And if PRA is strongly negative, I mean the sense class 1, class 2 are negative, the CDC cannot be positive. So one of the two is going to be wrong. And you know the flow is also negative. So flow is negative, PRA is negative, then the CDC cannot be positive. So if something like that you get a positive, CDC in the absence, when the other two are negative, then CDC has to be a false positive test, and you have to repeat it. So summarizing, CDC cross match with anti-human globulin and complement is still relevant. It's easy to do, easy to validate and train personnel. When dilution is used, it can provide data on how severe is the preformed antibodies. It is low cost to do. It identifies complements fixing antibodies, which cannot be done with flow cross match, and also generally it cannot be done even with the solid phase assays like Luminix. Although there are complement um, DSAs or also C4D for DSAs also available, but they are not widely available. It helps to suspect false positive SAB reactivity due to denature antigen when CDC is repeatedly negative along with a negative flow cross match. It helps to identify false negative PRAs also. Like I said, false positive PRA, it can also help you to identify false negative PRAs, um, um, especially when the PRA on SAB comes negative due to sharing of epitopes by the antibodies. So these antibodies bind, and so it is a protection against a false negative PRA. And also it helps to identify the allele specific antibodies for particular DQ A and B combination, so which are missed by solid phase assays. In short, this test complements the new generation solid phase assays, and it should be done properly. So going on to next, the PRA class 1, class 2. Again, I would like to emphasize that this is a test which more often is missed, and it is extremely essential, extremely easy to do. So I'll tell you why it is. So the brief principle is the PRA screening, percentage PRA. These are the two subtypes of PRA which is available in the market. The PRA screening uses a bead where three haplo of class 1 and 5 haplo of class 2 are put in a single bead. So there's a class 1 bead and class 2 bead, and among the um, class 1 they have three classes of class 1, and again 5 classes of class 2. For in a percentage, whenever percentage PRA test is ordered, so one haplo is on one bead. When it comes to SAB, one antigen is mounted on one bead. So these are essentially how the bead is made. And as you must have heard about this, the Luminix platform is a versatile one. It can run PRA where they use two different wavelength of these lights. One is green and other one is a red laser. And the green one identifies the binding event or positivity of a particular bead, and red is actually the it's a marker for the bead. So all the beads have a particular number, HLA number, and so that one reads it. So the PRA running time is 2 hours roughly, and in centers which do cadaver transplant where we need to get CDC on time, so PRA result comes much ahead. So if imagine the PRA result comes as negative, then the CDC cross match is almost always negative. So that gives you a time, and again the same thing it can help you to get a false. Sometimes the CDC's report is strongly positive, but then it comes with a negative PRA. It is not at all possible. So the CDC has to be negative. So that way PRA helps you. And there are two different kits currently available in the market all over the world. One is 1 lambda, other one is an immunocar kit. They are essentially same with some minor differences in the antigens that are mounted on the beads. And mica antibodies can also be detected, but it's currently available only in the 1 lambda kits. So this will be a classical readout, how a readout appears for a PRA. In this situation, this test is used in a post-transplant monitoring. So we've been talking only about the pre-transplant, but some of these can be used post-transplant. So as you can see here, on the bead, the antigen is mounted. The allo antibody which is present in the patient is bound to this antigen, and then they are tagged with a antibody, anti-human antibody with a fluorescent sensor, and this is the first one. The is a pre-transplant. You can see everything is blank, meaning there is no antibody at all. But post-transplant, the class 1 is still low titers, but then class 1, class 2 is positive, and then this patient 15-day post-transplant has significant MFA values for a bunch of um, B antigens. And post plasmapheresis, the antibody titers reduce, the MFA values reduce, but you can see here all the same antibodies are present. And again, at the end of 55 days, also the same situation. The MFA values significantly reduce, but then they are still positive at a low titers. Same antibodies are present at a low titers. So what are the advantages of PRA is class 1, class 2 testing is it is faster, cheaper, robust, and technical skill training is, needed is very low. They can be easily trained. And if PRA class 1, class 2, MIK are negative, then there is a very low risk of ABMR. So it gives you some kind of confidence. If all negative, that is like PRA negative, CDC negative, flow cross match negative, then we can easily proceed with the extremely low probability of a ABMR in the future. So again, these tests, none of these tests test the non-HLA antibodies. So the immunological events, because of a presence of a non-HLA, can happen, but the anti-HLA antibodies are not there. So if that's what if all the three are negative. If PRA class 1, class 2 is positive, so in that case we need to do a SAB along with a high resolution HLA typing by NGS or Luminix. So I'll be telling you in brief about the high resolution HLA in the subsequent part of the presentation. So for cadaver transplant program, percentage PRA is required because it tells us to know what is the probability of getting a matching donor in future. And also in some countries they give a higher point system, so the higher point in the point system, so that these people have access to more number of donors, so they end up getting a transplant in a lifetime because they have antibodies against a whole lot of donors. So disadvantages of PRA testing and the source of error are some antigens are not represented in PRA kits. So these kits are made mostly for the Caucasian population and the population which commonly is seen in the Western countries. They are not specifically made for different regions of the world. So and HLA distribution on the population can be varying widely in different populations. So uncommon ones will be missed, and it may not function very well in countries like Bangladesh, India, where these beads are not generally specifically made for this population. So false positive due to denatured antigens. So sometimes when these antigens are mounted on the bead, they can get denatured. So whenever a new kit or a new batch is used, we need to validate with the old positive and negative samples. So that is a way of validating, checking, having a control, because they can give wrong reports. We need to be alerted by a negative flow or a negative CDC cross match. So when you have a positive PRA but under negative flow and negative CDC, then there's a problem somewhere. So when we need to troubleshoot that. So when there is shared epitope, as one bead has many antigens due to sharing of the antibodies, the MFA values may be low and can be classified as falsely negative. So this is common when antibodies are against common antigens. So I will tell you about what are CREGs, CREGs, CREGs. So these are all like so with experience you can figure out that in SAB, like in a PRA, because there is no readout on which all antigens are used, so you won't be able to figure out. But then, like if it is positive, then anyway you have to do an SAB. So I'll show you in this particular transplant. Okay, so PRA class 1, class 2, what do we do in Bangladesh? So PRA, I've not seen it being done commonly. So again, this is a very critical test and it has to be done. And LALPATH uses MFI of 500 to define positivity, but then each lab needs to have their own positive and negative control. And based on that, they have to define cutoffs. For how to define positive controls and negative controls is based on the validation cohorts they use. So this is something the lab has to individually do. But you should be aware of that. And so some labs just have an empirical cutoff, like the LALPATH lab I've seen. But some labs they have their own cutoffs. The cutoffs can vary as even as much as 800. So how do we solve this? So next to CDC cross match, PRA mix screen must always be done, and it's, as I told you, it's extremely easy to set it up, especially when you have a Luminix platform available. We just have to buy the kit and we have to use. The training is minimal, so it's easy to be implemented, and it alerts for a possible sensitized recipient. So I'll show you a patient where I saw a previous day. So I'm not sure whether you're able to see it, but the first one is the CDC, which has come negative, and the PRA class 1 has come positive, class 2 and MICA has come negative, and the flow cross match all are negative. So I know that this patient must be having a non-donor specific antibody against the population, and the antibody which the patient is having class 1 may not be donor specific. So I can proceed now. I can proceed without any more testing. I don't have to do an SAB also. But then, like, I've ordered an SAB, and I would want to, and also a high resolution HLA for donor and the recipient. And I will check that even remotely there is no anti-HLA, donor specific HLA again class 1. So I'm going to do an SAB and proceed. But like even otherwise, I could have just proceeded because CDC flows are negative, and class 1 is positive. Okay. So in summary, PRA mixed screen class 1, class 2 MICA must be done for all cases after CDC cross match. It can be easily done in Bangladesh as the test is quite robust. They ensure that the lab maintain positive and negative controls, because sometimes like if the negative control also is positive, then everything will be positive. But unfortunately, labs don't share the report with you. So how will you know, how you can figure out that there is something wrong with the lab? Like you get multiple, for many patients you get both class 1 positive, class 2 positive, but then it does not match with flow cross match and CDC cross match. Both are negative, so it doesn't make sense, right? So in that case, you have to talk to the lab and tell them that maybe their test is falsely positive. Um, so when in doubt, you can use the applications, because in this recording, whenever I'm using this particular software, the transplantworkup.com, the video getting paused, so that's why I'm not showing you, but you can just check it. So whatever I'm telling you, like you can just put those combination in this website, and you'll be able to understand how what I'm trying to say. Because some of the things what I'm saying you may not connect to, because this is a complicated presentation in a short time. So you can just use the website and figure out the various combinations, and the software will guide you what you're supposed to do next. So you do 10 times, 20 times, then you'll get a hang of what to do. So when in doubt, proceed to SAB and high resolution HLA. So this is what I've done for the previous case. So in virtual cross matches, we have to be mindful of cross-reacting epitopes. I'll be talking about cross-reacting epitopes later on. When still in doubt, you can mail the SAB and the HLA to my email ID. It's ilangovanv@gmail.com. So PR screen is used to monitor for de novo antibodies post-transplant also for patients with negative PRA screen pre-transplant. So again, a couple of days back, I saw a patient where his pre-transplant PRA was negative. So he was being monitored every 3 months with a PRA, the first year with a PRA, and after 9 months, his PRA suddenly became positive. So after that, an SAB was done, and SAB showed strong positivity against class 2 DR donor-specific antibodies. So this also helps you to monitor the patients immunologically post-transplant. So for pre-transplant PRA positive patients, only SAB can be used to monitor in these situations. Okay, so this test can be used also for post-transplant monitoring. Going on to the next thing, which is flow cross match. Again, very, very interesting one, important one. So here the technology is the recipient serum is mixed with the donor cells and also a immunoglobulin, anti-human immunoglobulin. But here in this case, they're tagged with a fluorescent. Okay. So unlike CDC where complement is added, in flow cytometry cross match, the fluorescent tagged anti-human or immunoglobulin is added, and complements are not added here. So in flow, what you can see is a readout of a lymphocyte here, and here it is gated using CD3 and CD19 for B cell. CD3 is for T cell gating. You can see the B cell, the spread is here, and T cell spread is here, and this is a negative control. So you can see this is the spread of a negative control, and this is the spread of a T cell positive control. Similarly, this is the spread of a B cell negative control, and this is spread of a B cell positive control. So, so when the test or the patient sample is close to the negative control, so the test is negative. If it's close to the positive control, test is positive, and vice versa. And for also, it applies for T and B cells. So I'll show you examples here. So in this picture, no, what you see is the black one is a negative control here, and again a black one here. You can barely see it next to the green one. The green one is a patient sample. So you can see the patient sample is overlapping the black one, and here both in T and B cells. So because they are close to the black one, so they are negative. So this is pictorial. So again, there are numbers for it also. So these numbers are like these numbers are will give you ratio as well as delta. Let me just show here. So here these are the minimum 500 B cell has to be counted in during this test, or event has to happen, and minimum of 15,000 total lymphocyte has to be involved in this test. So 500 B cell and 15,000 total lymphocytes has to be involved. So if this output is sometimes not there in printout, so we have to be mindful of that. So this is a way of knowing whether the test was done properly. And here you can look at the ratio. So every lab have their own defined cutoff for a positive T and a B cell. And for the labs in Bangladesh, these numbers are not printed, but then these numbers are important. Again, there's one more important thing we need to know, like delta difference. Delta difference is between the negative control and the test for the patient sample. So as per the guidelines, we need to have, so this column only is used, the third column only is used generally. The more than 40 cutoff for a T cell and more than 100 cutoff for a B cell. The difference between negative control and test sample has to be there to call it a positive. So sometimes the ratio can be negative, whereas the delta difference or the difference between the mean a channel shift for the negative control and the test sample can be significant. In that case also the test is regarded as positive. So the flow cross match has a higher sensitivity to detect donor specific antibodies than the CDC. There is no interference with IgM antibodies. These are the advantages. So unlike PRA or SAB, it does not suffer from the following problems. For example, some antigens are not represented in PRA kit, especially uncommon ones. But then in flow, this is not an issue because the antigen is from the donor. The false positive due to denatured antigens is also a problem. Um, in a PRA kit or a SAB kit, but again that is not a problem here. So, when in denatured situations, you'll have a false positive PRA SAB, whereas flow will be negative. When there is shared epitopes, as I've told you, so due to sharing of the antibodies, the MFA values can be low for the PRA and SAB. So it functions as to safeguard against a false negative PRA or a SAB. So again, in patients who are on rituximab, pronase treatment is an additional step that has to be used to find out whether the positive CDC is because of an antibody or not. So flow positive patient should not be desensitized, because some of the patients would ask you for desensitization protocols and they want to proceed with the existing donors. So you have to be very cautious because the generally flow positive patients are very high risk patients and desensitization should not be done. So desensitization can be done for patients who are SAB positive for a antibody, but CDC and flow has to be negative. But if you're doing desensitization for a flow positive patient, the risk of problems are much higher. And technical expertise, these are the disadvantages. Technical expertise needed for a flow cross match is very high. The negative control needs to be built with more than 25 AB positive donor lymphocytes periodically once a year. So the negative control ideally needs to be done based on the locally available donor cells. So this is essential. So if the labs don't do this, then you may get a wrong values. It has high false positive and negative rates due to technical errors, and hence it has to be validated periodically. The B cells are fragile and false positive B cells are infrequently seen. So you need to know what is the percentage of positive B cells and in the absence of positive, in the absence of with a negative PRA and negative SAB, negative CDC cross match. So this gives you an idea as what is your center or your lab false positive rates. So it should not be very high. So you should suspect false positive B cell positive when PRA and CDC are negative. Again, you can use this particular web app. It will help you to alert you. And consider repeating flow cross match if you feel so. Like for example, an isolated B cell positive in the presence of a negative PRA CDC. The flow cross match again, the prone for errors, so they need to be validated periodically. So unlike the CDC and the PRA we have seen, this is error prone and validation is a must. It's an exceptionally important test, but unfortunately we need to be careful with these reports of this test. And needs local negative control, and it's sensitive to cell separation, especially B cells can get damaged during the separation. And training of staffs are very essential for flow cross match, more than the other two tests we saw. So here is a test report in Bangladesh. We see that this is a problem here. So ratio is never given, the delta is never given, and the other technical parameters of what is the number of events, B cell events, T cell events, total events, none of them is given. So basically, whenever there is a problem in the testing, there is no way that we will know that it's a technical problem. Okay, so the one on the left hand side is a negative one. You can see it is hugging the negative. The black one is a negative control, whereas in the second one, it is away from the negative control. So that's a rituximab treated patient. So the B cell was positive. We did not use they did not use pronase, so it shows as B cell positive. So what are the solutions for us in Bangladesh? So basically we need to make friends with the lab head and technician who do flow cross match, visit the lab, check how it is done, verify whether they're doing it the right way. So validate the negative and the positive samples. Okay, so you have to validate the negative and positive samples. so that the test is built properly, and you have to request them to report the ratio and delta of mean shift, so they know that so both of us can work together. Okay, and the cell acquisition has to be done the right way, 5,000 to 15,000. You have to build local negative controls with based on 3 standard deviation, and minimum of 500 B cells and has to be there, and output has come as ratio and delta. So we are going to discuss on virtual cross match, but before that we are going to learn a bit about HLA allele. Okay, so high resolution HLA is the only way forward. So I see a lot of some of us use the serological test based HLA, which are prone for a lot of errors, and so this is high resolution HLA typing. So it's usually like this: HLA hyphen separated by and then the A antigen, and there is separator asterisk mark. So if you see the serological HLA typing and the new high resolution HLA typing, the way it is written is different. Okay, we have a asterisk mark, and 02 is the allele group, 101 is a specific HLA protein, and 01 is tells you about substitution in a mutation in a coding region, and again the next after that is to show the non-coding area and um, non-coding area. Okay, so this is what to say, you need to go through it. I'm going to skip this slide fast because basically once if you want to, you can pause the video and then see that the way it's written, it has different meanings. Okay, so these are high resolution, so much information can be generated by the high resolution HLA typing. So usually done these days by NGS platform because of thorough output, and there are new technologies which are available which can uncover even new antigens. Luminix bead-based assay also can help you identify the HLA allele. Okay, so the HLA typing by Mia Fora NGS MFlex HLA typing kit. So this is a kit which is high throughput. It has ability to identify new alleles, including null alleles, and they have 3 algorithms currently which can identify HLA alleles confidently. So in intermediate resolution HLA typing using Luminix, sometimes human inference is required, because HLA typing in these sometimes you can have errors or problems. So if you actually go through the readouts, you'll understand more clearly. I'm not showing it here. But then that problem is little lesser in NGS because the algorithm built such a way that it gives you more clear HLA. So I've seen some reports saying that they say that the antigen is either this or that. So that is not how as doctors we would like. So in this situation, the NGS platform may be functioning better. So this one shows the difference between the serological HLA typing and molecular HLA typing. So if you are using SAB virtual cross match, we cannot use a serological test. We have to use a high resolution typing. So single bead assay, again SAB. So here we have, again we need to have positive negative controls. Again, most of the labs don't give this number. There are instances where I've seen that the negative control itself will have very high MFA values, meaning that negative control should not have so much MFA values. When negative only is having so much, everything will have very high values. So false high MFA values have been seen also more often in class 2 HLA. So you have to be careful about this. So unfortunately, the labs don't give you this unless you have access to the lab. So this is an example of a class 1 under C also antibody. So the next one is showing PRA, calculated PRA for class 1 and calculated PRA for the class 2. And so basically this is how a printout look. And this is a very interesting slide here. So here what it does is, whenever we are doing virtual cross matches, most of us forget the fact that many times these antigens and antibodies what we see, they share the cross reactivity. Like here for example, if you see here 60 is a B antigen here, and imagine the patient has antibody against 81 and 48, and the and the donor HLA is B60. So he's going to have antibody against cross reactive against 81 and 48. So we may be thinking, no, it's only 60. No, it's not. It's going to have reactivity against 81 and 48. So we have to be a little careful about that. So whenever you have antibody against um, 81 48, so if the donor antigen is 60, and so they'll react also to the antibodies against the donor HLA 60 will also um, react to the 81 and 48. So this is like cross reactive HLA molecules. Similarly for the class 2 also same thing. Here if there is antibody against 51 and patient's donor HLA is DR2, so they're going to be positive. Okay, so even though like it may appear as if that anti DR2 is negative, but then if DR51 is positive, the patient is going to have antibodies. I'm going to repeat this again. So whenever you have antibody against 71, and even if the antigen of the donor is 72, he will react. You may think, no, the antigen is only against 71. No, not like that. So virtual cross matches, unfortunately, most of the lab, including the LALPATH, which a lot of people use, do not report the CR Craig equivalence, and this may lead to ABMR, and because we will miss that. Okay, so in virtual cross matches, it's not mere mixing and matching, but we should be mindful of the cross reacting epitopes. So challenges in virtual cross matches is the donor antigen is not always represented. A lot to variation is seen in SAB kit, lot to lot, vendor to vendor. So there is variation. Not all the antigens are represented. So we have to be careful. So that is where your flow 1 CDC helps you. If all the three are negative, then you are safe. If virtual cross match is negative, but your CDC and flow is consistently positive, then you have to look at the antigens. Maybe the antigens are not represented in the beads. The shared epitopes may decrease the MFA value of the target antigens, which we discussed before. Then there are inhibitory factors in the serum, which can also give a falsely negative test. So in that case, then we need to. There are ways of removing the inhibition. We can add cysteine. We can do some heat inhibition, heat treatment of the samples. Okay. So as a rule of thumb, how to find the sensitized patient is in BD in Bangladesh, the incidence of antibody mediated rejection are extremely high compared to the usual rate of around 10% of samples, 10-11% of samples sent to the Indian labs. For Indian patients, we see sensitized, they'll have antibodies, and highly sensitized 5 to 6, meaning highly sensitive means they have very high titers against multiple antigens, donor antigens. And antibodies against DR52 and 53 are very refractory to desensitization. So if you have a patient with against these two antibodies, again these two antigens, so you have to be very careful with desensitization. So in the finally in the last part of the presentation, so about non-HLA. Non-HLA is even more confusing than the HLA antibodies, but I'll make an effort to make it clear for you. So 38% of chronic graft failures are due to non-HLA antibodies, so which is a pretty high number, right? So and 10% of C40 negative ABMR are due to non-HLA. So non-HLA antibodies do not use complement. The ABMR in patients with 0 mismatches, that is like 10 out of 10 match, are likely to be non-HLA antibody related. So this is context. And types of non-HLA are MIK, MIK-B, angiotensin 1 receptor antibody, endothelin A receptor antibody, and vimentin. A few more, but these are the common ones. So when to suspect is when the DSA is negative, when you have early severe ABMR with or without TMA, C40 is negative, and ABMR in the presence of a 0 mismatch. So how to identify is microscreening is available, and once you run a microscreening which comes positive, then you have to do a typing of the donor typing of the antigen and patient or recipient typing for antibody, and anti-endothelin antibody screening also has to be done, and anti-81 receptor antibody screening also has to be done. So finally, mm, any antibody positive against the donor antigen, even if it disappears later, like sometimes the CDC will be negative, sorry, positive, and again becomes negative. The flow will be negative, positive, again becomes negative. The SAB will be positive, again become negative. So you can go ahead and do the transplant, no problem. But always remember that post-transplant there can be a rebound, and you should be prepared for that. Never attempt to do desensitization, but always try to identify a compatible donor. So, and also I need to tell you extremely important one. I almost forgot to put. In fact, I didn't make the slide in this video. That is, never ever do the lysate DSA or the it's called Luminix Cross Match or Luminix DSA. Never do that. The reason is, so this test is never done in most of the advanced transplant units, because they come with so high false positive, so high false negative, that it confuses everybody. So please don't do it, and please check on to this website. It help you to learn better. A lot of the concepts I told, for due to lack of time, I could not be more clearer, but then it will help you to understand with patience. Okay, thank you one and all for patient listening.